Welcome to Texas Probate Made Simple under the KISS principle.
Welcome back to Texas Probate Made Simple under the KISS principle. Riley Hetherington is a board-certified attorney serving Harris County and surrounding Texas counties. His practice is focused on guiding families through probate and estate planning with clarity, compassion, and confidence. I'm Heidi Mack, and today we're covering how to choose the right executor for your estate. Thanks for joining us again, Riley. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Heidi. Look forward to speaking with you.
All right, wonderful. Well, let's get to these hard-hitting questions. Riley, what could you first explain what an executor actually is, who's unfamiliar with this term, and what they do in Texas probate?
Well, in Texas, an independent executor who is appointed in a Texas will is an officer of the court whose duties are to gather the assets of an estate, to administer those assets, pay any debts that the person had at the time of his or her death, and then to distribute the balance of those assets to the listed beneficiaries under the terms of the will. So that's his or her duties, and that's his or her job with respect to what's supposed to be done in connection with a person's assets and liabilities at the time of their death.
Why does choosing the right person for that role matter so much?
Well, in Texas, we've established a body of law as to how an independent executor or any court officer, if it's an independent administrator of an estate or an administrator that's been appointed by a court in an estate, has to perform his or her duties. And that's what's called in Texas a fiduciary duty. And the cases have defined fiduciary duty in four different aspects. First of all, that person has a duty of loyalty, which means that he or she must act solely and for the benefit of another party, in this case, the estate and the beneficiaries under the estate, avoiding any conflicts of interest and any self-dealing. That person also has a fiduciary duty of care, which means that they've got to make informed decision and exercise reasonable care and diligence in performing those duties. Additionally, he or she has a fiduciary duty of full disclosure, which means that a full disclosure must be made of all relevant facts and information to the beneficiaries under the terms of the estate. And finally, they have a fiduciary duty of good faith, which means that they must act honestly and fairly in all dealings. So that fiduciary duty is a very high bar that the executor or independent executor has to meet. And if they don't meet it, are subject to liability and claims against he or she for violating all four of those, any or all of those four duties raised under the law of the state of Texas.
So then what are, when you're naming this executor, what are those traits then and habits that you're looking for? Because that's just such a, thing that you need to worry about. Like, what makes the biggest difference?
Well, there's certain traits that the executor should have. Some have more than others, but what I tell clients to look for is a person who is calm and decisive, who's a pretty good communicator, who is very transparent in how they perform their duties, and who has business skills and conflict resolution skills just based on their personality. And everybody is not perfect. No one has all of those typically, but there are certain persons that have strengths in each one of them. And those are the kind of folks that I always say should go to the top of the list when you're trying to choose a person to serve in that very important role, which, as I've previously indicated, has very high duties with it to serve. And some people can name the perfect person right off the bat, but typically I tell them to give it some definitely some distinct consideration with time, sleep on it before you make that final decision.
Are you able to share an example of an executor that made things go much smoother for everyone involved?
Yeah, I certainly can. I can give you numerous examples of clients who chose the wrong executor, but I can give you just as many on folks that chose the right person. Uh, I've seen executors remove conflicts between beneficiaries that I don't think anybody could have ever removed. But because of their abilities and because of those traits that I discussed, they were able to do it. Additionally, I've seen executors that have saved the estate and the beneficiaries enormous amounts of money, time, and delays because they were decisive and because they definitely made those decisions based on their own abilities and knowledge, as well as sound advice that they've received from professionals, certified public accountants if they've hired them, attorneys if they've hired them, or business consultants if they want to use that. So I can't tell you how much uh, mitigation of expense, time, and trouble a really good executor can make in a particular matter.
Well, you touched a little bit on the when they pick the wrong person. Have you seen like numerous kinds of problems that are like, like big ones that happen a lot when there's a wrong person that's in charge?
Well, the issue typically becomes one of greed. And if the person has a financial interest in the estate, they can certainly serve as a executor. But sometimes that can really bleed over into some bad situations with respect to asset management, with respect to payment of debt and bills on a timely basis. Uh, and it can really, really cause substantial problems. So I always also look very closely at what kind of conflicts exist or could exist. And I've seen it in practice where the greed and personal interest of the executor can really get in the way of an efficient and well managed estate administration.
Well, it's interesting, like you said, hate to say that greed does play a part in a lot of this, and most families do use family members as their executor. But can it make sense sometimes then to appoint somebody outside of the family?
Definitely. I've had clients who's made statements like this to me. My kids don't have the good sense to get out of the rain. And I said, well, if they don't have good sense to get out of the rain, then let's start talking about somebody outside the family that does have good sense to get out of the rain. And sometimes it is less expensive to try to use professionals, trust companies, certain banking institutions, et cetera, to make certain decisions and to perform those tasks when you feel like that all of the traits that we've been talking about as far as objectivity, greed, uh, ability, financial ability, and business acumen don't exist. I definitely recommend to try to pursue anyone or any entity that could perform that function as far as being an executor outside the family, immediate family.
Then, once you have chosen this executor, whether inside the family, outside the family, is it very important for the executor to live nearby?
It is. So, for instance, I've had executors that once lived in Texas and then obviously moved around to different parts of the country, in some cases outside the country. And non residence just creates another layer of difficulty. You have to appoint in Texas, if that's the case, and you live outside the state, a resident agent here so that if someone brings a lawsuit against the estate to collect money, or et cetera, there's a person within Texas that they can actually serve paperwork with and that kind of thing. But more importantly, it's an issue of staying close to certain assets. And most people have as major assets their home and their local financial institutions that they've used, personal property located close to where they live, et cetera. And it sure is nice to have a person that's close to that physically that can come down and make physical inspection of the properties and deal with the properties with clear knowledge of local restrictions and transaction requirements, etc. It's really good to have somebody that's local to serve in that capacity.
So I think we talked you talked a little bit about this on other forums and such in different episodes where you're saying, things are not always set in stone. But for people listening, like for today, if someone realizes they have the executor that they've chosen might not be the right fit, can they update that decision?
Well, as I've indicated, all of these documents are revocable and amendable for the most part. And it's actually a pretty simple paperwork transaction to simply remove and replace on paper the person to serve in that capacity as an executor. In Texas, an amendment to a will, for instance, is called a codicil. And you can go in and pick and choose which items of the will can be and should be altered and reduce that to writing and sign it in front of some witnesses. And it works just fine. So you've got the original will and all the dispositions and everything, and you can make specific amendments to it at any point in time. So if you come to the decision that that is not the right independent executor to be named in your will, an amendment can easily be done. It has to be done in writing. It has to be signed appropriately. But once done, then the executor can be changed. And I have a lot of that. I get a lot of calls from clients because of circumstances. For instance, you've named someone in your will and they've died, or they've gotten sick and they can't serve. Well, you really need to at that point in time, amend and make sure you do have someone in there that can take care of those duties. I also, at the beginning, and when we first name executors in a will, I always ask the person to name at least one alternate executor, so that if something happens to that person first named, you've at least got someone named to back up and to come in their place, should that be the case.
Well, Riley, you've given us so much information today, and while we end this episode here, what is that one thing for somebody that hasn't chosen an executor yet? Like, what's the most important takeaway we got to take from this episode?
Well, to the extent that you can put human emotion aside and be very cold and calculating, I think objectivity of the selection is really important for the person. And I always try to get my clients to focus from a very objective standpoint of who the best person will be. And I go through the qualities we've talked about today. I try to give them examples. But if you're objective and you are transparent, normally the selection of the executor works out just fine.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Riley, I can tell that you care about this subject and care about your clients for this. And so that is it for today's episode of Texas Probate Made Simple under the KISS principle. If you're making estate planning decisions and want to help choosing the right executor, visit hetheringtonlaw.com to connect with Riley. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone who might find this helpful. Thank you again, Riley. We really appreciate you being here.
Always great to see you, Heidi. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.